As the sun yawned atop the tall mountain in Ramallah, having spent the night beneath the dark blanket of night, Fatima yawned in her bed after a sleepless night. Today was the day she would visit her father, the first time she would see him in 3 long years. Fatima got out of bed and stood before the large mirror in her wardrobe, contemplating herself and wondering, has my father's appearance changed like mine has? I'm no longer a 10-year-old girl. I'm now in my 14th year, and all my features have changed. Will he recognize me? Of course, he will recognize me. His heart will tell him that I'm Fatima before I even speak to him. Zahir told me last night that our father is always the first to notice them among the crowds of people before they notice him among the prisoners. Yes, he's my father. Well, I need to get ready. I want to record everything I see and every word he says to me. I promised Fathi I would tell him everything that happens, and he can laugh at me all he wants. But I won't hide anything that happens between my father and me, whether it's a conversation, perhaps a rebuke, or maybe just some criticism. You've changed, father. No, it's you who's changed, Fatima. I'm sure that's what he'll say to me. Fatima's mind was swirling with thoughts, and her movements became tense. It was clear she was about to say her usual phrase, my stomach hurts, I feel nauseous. But for some reason, she didn't say it this time. Instead, she followed her mother, her uncle, and little Ali. The car stopped in front of the central prison in Ramallah, and Fatima was surprised to see a crowd of people gathered on the road in front of a small gate, waiting to be allowed in. She asked in amazement, what's this crowd, mother? They're visitors, just like us, Fatima. The gate opened, and people rushed inside. Fatima thought the process was over, and that each person would head off to see the prisoner they came to visit in this courtyard. But she was shocked to find that the courtyard was only for waiting, with several closed steps above, resembling a high desk or a government platform. She asked her mother, what's happening now? Now, Fatima, a soldier will come and stand behind that platform and start calling out the names of some prisoners. Their relatives will then go inside to visit them. After they finish and leave, the soldier will come back and call out more names, and this process continues until everyone is done. So, we'll just stand here and wait? You stay here with Ali, Fatima, while I try to get through this crowd and get closer to the platform to hear the names. If your father's name is called, I'll signal for you to come forward. The soldier came to the platform and started calling out the names of prisoners. As each prisoner's relatives approached, the soldier counted them and said, 3 only, 3 only. If a 4th person tried to enter, the soldier would become enraged, yelling and punishing the people by delaying them under the sun and denying them their visit. A large, grim-faced, ill-tempered, loud, and foul-mouthed female soldier helped enforce this rule, causing people to avoid the platform to avoid confrontation with her and her malice. The soldier continued his work, allowing visitors in groups of 3 to visit 5 prisoners at a time for 30 minutes. Each time, everyone, including Zahir, anticipated the moment when her husband's name would be called. Finally, the soldier called out Abu Zahir's name. Zahir signaled for Fatima to approach with Ali, but the soldier began counting. 1, Zahir. 2, the uncle. Then, noticing Fatima carrying Ali, he shouted loudly, not allowed! Not allowed! You can't enter with that child. Fatima was confused and didn't know what to do. She couldn't hear what her mother was saying from beyond the large crowd of people. Fortunately, the soldier was distracted by other visitors who had finished their visit and were trying to leave the prison from in front of the platform. The soldier turned to push the people back, shouting, move back, quickly, all of you back. No one knew if this chaos was due to the people's behavior, the malice of the soldiers, or perhaps it was intentionally created by some to distract the soldier for some reason. A group was trying to steal a glance at the list of names the soldier had left on the platform, hoping to find out when their turn would be. An elderly woman smiled at Fatima as she approached her, as if she had good news to share. Listen, girl, my son's name is on the list right after your father's. Only my husband came with me to visit him, so give me your brother, and go ahead so the soldier can count you, and you can enter for your visit. Of course, I'll enter after you with your brother and my husband when they call my son's name. Once we're past that mean female soldier, I'll give your brother back to you. No one will check who belongs to whom at that point. Do you understand? The woman started to take Ali from Fatima, who hesitated to hand him over. But the woman added, "My dear, I'm an old woman. I can't run off with your brother. If they don't call my son's name after your father's, come and take him from me." Fatima looked around and saw the elderly woman's husband, worn out by age, nodding his head at her, saying, "Be careful, girl. The soldier is calling out names again." The elderly woman gently took Ali, and Fatima began to push through the crowd to reach the platform, where her mother and uncle were waiting to enter. The soldier counted again, 1, 2, 3. "Okay, go in." Then he called out the name of another prisoner. The elderly woman holding Ali, along with her husband, approached the platform. The soldier counted them and said, "Okay, go in." The soldier continued calling out the names of 3 more prisoners and counting their visitors, while Fatima played with Ali, who was still in the arms of the elderly woman. As soon as the soldier allowed the group to leave for their visit, Fatima took Ali and hurried after those who had gone ahead of her, thinking she would soon enter a room to see her father. The group walked behind the building, and Fatima looked ahead but saw no other building. Where was the group heading? She turned to her mother and asked, "Where is my father? Where will we see him? I don't see anything but a rocky hill rising in front of me behind this military building." "My dear, these are not the prison buildings. These are the military and government buildings. We need to follow the group walking ahead of us. After a few meters at the top of the hill, you'll see the prison buildings a bit further inside. That's where we'll see your father. Come on, he's waiting for us now." Fatima was very upset by what she saw, and disappointment was written all over her face as she tried to keep up with her mother, who had quickened her pace, leaving Fatima behind, struggling with her stomach issues once again. Fatima finally reached the prison buildings, where more soldiers and guards stopped the visitors to gather them together. They loudly and harshly barked orders in Hebrew, a language unfamiliar to the visitors' ears. Zahir noticed her daughter, who looked faint as she carried Ali at the back of the group. She went over, took Ali from her and said, "Stay strong. I want your father to see you at your best." Fatima didn't respond, but, without knowing why, she felt an overwhelming need for Zahir and Fathi to be there beside her at that moment. The feeling of loneliness and confusion returned to her in this crowded corner, while the mocking tones of the soldiers' voices filled her ears without pause. The thought of her father being just behind those walls made her even more anxious and distressed. She comforted herself by saying, "All right, it's almost over. Now my father will hug me. I'll see him and talk to him, and everything will be fine." Finally, the soldiers allowed the group to enter. Fatima didn't expect any more surprises, but contrary to her hopes, the group entered a room that was nothing more than a narrow corridor. Behind them was the wall, and in front of them a concrete barrier about a meter high, with a strong iron fence stretched up to the ceiling of the room. On the edge of this barrier, about half a meter thick, there was another iron fence stretching to the ceiling as well. At that moment, Fatima realized that her father and the other prisoners would enter from the other side to see them. A half-meter thick wall and 2 iron fences would separate her from her father. The soldiers began bringing in the prisoners, and voices grew louder as people called out to their loved ones. Within moments, the noise became shouting, as no one could hear their visitor due to the close proximity of the visitors and the cramped space of the narrow room. The prisoners were too far from their families to hear them well. Abu Zahir's face began to appear behind the iron fences as he approached the visitors, scanning the faces, searching for his wife or one of his children. Zahir called out to him loudly and waved so he would notice where they were. Fatima leaned against the wall behind her, watching him approach with a smile that had not lost its warmth and tenderness despite all the suffering he had endured. Abu Zahir reached the fence in front of his visitors and started speaking to them, asking about their well-being. He was trying to get a good look at little Ali, whom he hadn't seen since Ali was 3 months old. Zahir enthusiastically shared the news of reclaiming their land, telling him how she had achieved that miracle without a lawyer. The uncle, concerned about the time running out, interrupted her, saying, "Abu Zahir, it's important we hear your opinion before the visit ends. We want to sell a dunam of your land to build a house for your family with the proceeds." Abu Zahir was delighted by the news and interested in his brother-in-law's suggestion. But despite all that, he kept glancing occasionally at the girl leaning against the wall, staring at him with sad eyes. Abu Zahir kept stealing those glances at Fatima, then refocusing on what her uncle was saying without addressing her. Fatima thought he would finish all the talking and then speak to her without any distractions, giving her his full attention. So she contented herself with just observing his face, which had become thin and pale, worn with fatigue, until she heard the soldier shout, "Time's up!" It had been only half an hour, but it passed as swiftly as time could. The visit ended with the same coldness and detachment, as if a fire that had been blazing was suddenly extinguished by the cold water from a fire hose. The soldiers started raising their voices, ordering the prisoners that the time was up and that they had to comply without delay. Zahir turned to Fatima and said, "Come on, Fatima, let's go." Abu Zahir had begun to walk away when he heard his wife say those words. He quickly turned back and rushed to the fence, shouting, "Is that Fatima?" The soldiers noticed Abu Zahir's sudden return and began shouting at him. Two of them approached and grabbed him by the arms, trying to drag him out of the room, but he clung to the fence, repeating his question, "Is that Fatima? I didn't recognize you, my little girl. I thought you were visiting another prisoner." Fatima burst into tears as she saw her father being pulled out of the room, under the soldiers' curses and scolding. She rushed out of the visiting room, following the footsteps of those who had left before her, without looking back at her mother or uncle. All that occupied her mind was getting out of this cursed place, which they called Ramallah Central Prison. Everyone was affected by what had happened to Fatima and her father, and they tried to intervene to stop her from crying. But she quickened her pace, passing everyone without saying a word. When Zahir reached home, Fatima, unlike her usual self, ran straight to her bed. She buried herself under the covers and pretended to want to sleep. But the events of the day, combined with the restless night she had spent, made it easy for her to drift into a deep sleep after all that crying. Fatima fell into a deep slumber without even realizing it. After 2 hours of deep sleep, Fatima opened her eyes to find her brother, Zahir, sitting beside her, gently playing with a small strand of her hair that had fallen across her face. He said, "So, you're awake. How are you feeling now?" "Zahir, why are you sitting here like this? I was worried about you. I don't know why you always seem to be the one who bears the brunt of all the shocks in this family, my dear. Did you hear what happened?" Fatima was about to start crying again, remembering how her father had been dragged out of the room, and hearing his painful words as he admitted that he didn't recognize his daughter. But Zahir said, "Don't cry. Please don't cry. Mom has been crying all day, blaming herself for your sadness. She says she was so eager to tell him about reclaiming the land that she forgot about you. And the uncle, he was focused on getting your father's approval to sell a dunam of land before the visit ended. But as you know, it was only half an hour, and it passed without anyone realizing. No, Mom wasn't the reason for my sadness, nor was it the uncle. It's simply this whole thing called occupation. All those soldiers who control us. Do you know something, Zahir? The hardest feeling in the world is that feeling that swept over me when I realized that my father didn't recognize me, despite his repeated glances in my direction. My father didn't know me, I who grew up in his arms. His shoulders were my favorite seat, and his laughter when he called me my queen was my only music. His hands that lifted me into the air were my favorite world, my own private universe. I never saw him lift anyone else the way he lifted me when I grew a little older. But today my father was someone else. A thin, tired man who couldn't recognize me. And I had bet that he couldn't possibly fail to know me. Zahir patted his sister's head, failing to stop her from crying. He stepped away slightly, pretending to look for tissues, while actually hiding his own tears and trying to contain his emotions. Fatima calmed down a little, then asked, "Where is everyone?" "Well, Mom and Uncle are at our land. Najla, Zainab, Ali, and Haneen are sitting in the courtyard by the well. They don't know you've woken up." "Why are Mom and Uncle at the land?" "That's what I wanted to tell you. There's a man who wants to buy a dunam of our land. We're gonna sell it, Fatima, and rebuild our home. We'll be leaving this house, Fatima. Is that true?" "Yes. Yes, and there's another surprise. Fathi brought 3 new cypress trees to replace the ones that were uprooted. But he insisted that he wouldn't plant them unless you were there." "How happy I am with this, Zahir. Could it be that our dream is coming true, and that our father will be released from prison, so our lives will return to the way they were?" "And what would stop the dream from coming true?" "There's another dream that must come true, Zahir. My dream that you succeed in your final exams." "Do you doubt that I will?" "I will succeed, God willing. Fathi is waiting for me at the teacher's college, and we will both become teachers. So, we will give up the grocery store and live well." "That's your dream, then? Come on, let's go see what's happened with your mother and uncle, or maybe eat something first. Aren't you hungry?" "Yes, I am." And so, Fatima's pure laughter returned, along with her energy and even her mischievousness. Every day, the sun would rise to find Fatima already awake before it, having performed her prayer and spread out her books to study for her exams. The school year was drawing to a close, and the exams were nearly finished. Fatima had made it a habit to wake her brother Zahir so he could study for his final high school exams. He would get up to perform his ablutions and pray, just like his sister. They were not only good friends, but also a perfect brother and sister duo. Fatima was incredibly excited for the summer vacation. She planned to watch their new house being built, brick by brick, like a child growing up before her eyes year by year. But when the vacation started, the construction had only just begun, rising modestly above the ground, as there were few workers employed. This, according to her uncle, was to save money to ensure the house could be completed in the end. The well water on Zahir's land was the only source for the workers. Every morning, they had to draw the water with buckets and fill several barrels so that construction could continue smoothly. This made the work progress slowly. When her uncle would push the workers to hurry and scold them, they would protest and complain about the time they wasted each morning filling the barrels with water. Until the foreman finally said, "We're not filling the barrels anymore. Hire a couple of workers just for that task, and we'll focus only on the building." Things got complicated, and her uncle felt that everything was slipping out of his hands, so he rushed to his sister's house to complain about the situation. Fatima listened to every word her uncle said. She understood that the available funds wouldn't allow for hiring more workers, and that if the workers stopped filling the barrels, construction would come to a halt. So she spoke firmly, "We'll fill the water, Uncle." "We? Who's we?" "Me and my sisters." "But you're girls. You can't be around those workers." "I know. That's why we'll fill the barrels after the workers leave, at the end of the day. In the morning, they'll find them full. But Fatima, they might need to refill them more than once. Then, Uncle, you need to bring more barrels. And where am I supposed to get them from? That's your problem to solve. As for the water, I promise you that, with God's help, we'll manage to fill it. You're a smart girl, Fatima. All right, I'll take care of the barrels. And you better not let me down." And so it happened. The barrels were taken care of, and the workers accepted the amount of water that would be available each morning. Fatima, Zainab, and Najla carried their small barrels that used to hold ghee with sturdy handles for carrying. The girls cleaned them and took them to the well to fetch water and transfer it to the large barrels near the construction site. Zahir often had to carry her kerosene lamp to follow her daughters and light their work area, knowing that the workers wouldn't leave until late in the evening. She would leave another lamp for Zahir, who used the quietness of the house to focus on his studies until he finished his exams. Many times, Zahir also carried some sandwiches for her daughters, in case they wanted to take a break during their work. The task wasn't easy, and it wasn't fun. Until one night, when they sat down to rest after filling only half of the barrels, someone approached them in the dark and said, "Why are you sitting down, workers? 10 days of pay will be deducted." The girls shouted, "Zahir! Zahir has come to help us. But I'm not alone. There's a handsome young man with green eyes who wants to help too." Everyone laughed, and Zahir said, "Are you still teasing Fatima, Zahir? Even now? Where's Fathi? He's probably inspecting the construction site despite the darkness." But Fathi appeared behind him, saying, "Peace be upon you. How are you? Peace be upon you. How are you, Fathi? Where have you been all this time? You know, Aunt, that the teacher's college is a boarding school. They don't let us leave easily. Where's my friend Fatima?" Fatima turned towards Fathi, staring at him in the dim light of the oil lantern, with a look of surprise and bewilderment on her face. Fathi said, "Here you are. I heard you're trying to write poetry, so I brought you this book as a gift to encourage you." "Thank you. But how did you know I—" "Of course, Zahir. Do you two talk about me?" "Actually, Fatima, Fathi liked what you wrote, even though it was broken poetry." "What? Did he read it? Who allowed you to do that, Zahir?" "Calm down, Fatima. You've gained an admirer of your writing." Fatima, angry with her brother, grabbed the full water barrel with obvious frustration and carried it to the large barrels. Her sisters followed, whispering and calling out to Fatima, "You shouldn't be upset. Take it easy, Fatima. Don't act like this in front of Fathi. You've embarrassed him." But Fatima remained silent, not responding to her sisters. She quickly emptied her barrel and returned to the well. Fathi said, "Listen, Zahir, you'll fill the water from the well for your sisters, and I'll meet them and carry their barrels to empty them into the big barrel. If you finish first and join the work, and the empty barrels pile up around you, Fatima will judge you however she wants because you upset her. But if I finish first and you have to wait for the barrels to be filled again, Fatima will judge me because I didn't ask your permission before reading her poetry. Do you agree?" "Of course I agree. It's a challenge, then. Girls, bring me the barrels. Mother, hand me the bucket." The girls were excited about this idea, and their actions made it clear they were on Fathi's side, so Fatima could judge Zahir. The competition began, the atmosphere filled with excitement and laughter, and the fast pace of the work was no longer tiring. Zahir filled the barrels, and Fathi met the girls at the large barrels, quickly carrying and emptying their water. Funny comments were exchanged, wrapped in Zahir's mother's prayers for the two young men and the girls. Despite all the effort, it wasn't easy to determine who was winning, leading Fathi to stand before Fatima and say, "Now, my lady, you can judge us both." Fatima laughed and said, "So, you'll both come tomorrow at the same time to finish the competition?" The girls cheered with joy. "Long live Fatima! Long live Fatima! Tomorrow evening will be just as beautiful as tonight. Filling the water barrels is becoming fun." Everyone gathered around Zahir in the courtyard by the well, seeking rest. Under the glow of a kerosene lamp, Fatima opened a poetry book and began reading the first poem aloud. Fatima wasn't sure why, but that night, she glanced at Fathi and felt that he was looking at her in a different way. Evenings passed with the family, who had grown accustomed to laughing and enjoying the laborious task of filling the water barrels. Zahir began preferring to prepare dinner in the evening to bring to the courtyard after the barrels were filled. The family, wrapped in love and laughter, cherished these moments. Even Haneen and Ali. Each night, Fatima carried the poetry book with her, often pretending to read it to avoid the feeling that Fathi's attention toward her had changed, that his gaze lingered a little longer than before. At 14 years old, Fatima poured all her energy into watching every stone rise in the construction of their new home. She and her family were determined to build it to match the upper floor of the house that had been demolished, where they once lived. Of course, there would no longer be 16 steps to climb up and down, as she had done as a child, but no matter, it would be a much better place to live than their current house, which Fatima referred to as the House of Curtain Doors. As time passed, the shape of the house became clearer. This is the girls' room, and this is the kitchen, and here's the glass balcony. Everything was starting to resemble their old home. One day, the family prepared to fetch water as usual, but this time Zahir didn't seem as enthusiastic. He said, "I don't know how we'll fill the barrels without Fathi." Fatima turned to him, wanting to ask why, but she hid her concern and stayed silent, waiting to hear her mother ask, "Why without Fathi? Isn't he coming? Did something happen to him?" "No, Mom. But I don't know why he seemed like he was hiding something from me when he said he'd be away for 2 days. He also mentioned he might bring you some good news." "Good news? What news could Fathi possibly have for me? What's going on, Zahir?" "I told you, Mom. I feel like he's keeping something from me." "Oh, how I fear." "What, Mom?" "I fear that Fathi might be thinking about one of your sisters." "No, no, Mom. Don't think that far. Fathi told me he won't marry until I do. We'll marry together, which means years from now, when my sisters are long past their prime." Zahir laughed and said, "Thank God. I love him, and I don't want to lose him. But what good news could he bring? We'll have to wait and see." The days dragged on, and the third night came when the family gathered without Fathi. Though none of them could quite place why, they all agreed that the evenings had felt heavier without him. His presence had become essential for their family gatherings to feel complete. Zahir moved the lamp around, pointing to her daughters to take this or leave that, as they prepared to leave the courtyard and return home. Suddenly, she spotted a young man waving from afar, too out of breath to call out. Realizing it was Fathi, she sought confirmation. "Isn't that Fathi coming?" Everyone turned to where she pointed, and Zahir jumped up to welcome him, saying, "Welcome, Fathi. Sit down and catch your breath." Fathi threw himself onto the ground where they sat, struggling to speak. "I want my reward first." "He's insistent, Mom. He wants his reward." "What is it, Fathi? What news do you have to share?" "I've arranged the ironwork for the glass balcony. There's no need to go to the blacksmith or pay any money. It's all ready. Rest, my boy, then explain it slowly." "Auntie, do you know where the Jews dumped the debris from the demolished house?" "No, the people in the camp know. I won't hide from you that many of the boys sneak in there to take whatever metal, pipes, or anything they can sell. I made a deal with them to bring me the iron for the glass balcony, and I'd reward them handsomely. They did it and brought it back." "Are you serious, my boy?" "Yes, and they brought the door too, though it will need some adjustments by a good blacksmith." "You're amazing, Fathi. How much did you pay the boys, so I can repay you?" "No need. This is my gift to you for the new house. As for the iron and the blacksmith, that's extra work for Uncle, I think." Zahir began praising God and thanking Fathi so profusely that everyone thought she'd never stop. Meanwhile, Zahir patted Fathi on the shoulder and said, "You do all this, and you're not even 20 yet. What will you do when you're 30 or 40? "I think I'll still be your friend." Everyone laughed, and they felt happiness return to their lives, as if joy had finally remembered them and knocked on the door of their days once again. The days continued to bring hope and happiness to Zahir's family. Months passed, and the summer holiday ended. But the girls' work in helping with the construction didn't stop. Even though the workers had finished the building, the girls began hauling stones in their barrels instead of water, filling the low spots in the ground to level it with the rest of the surface. Then they started bringing in yellow sand to cover the ground before the tiles were laid. Of course, they carried the tiles themselves to have everything ready for the workers without complaint. And so the building was completed. Zahir's lamp now lit the rooms of the new house, moving from one to the next, instead of sitting by the courtyard well. Zahir and Fathi's competitions had shifted from carrying water to singing songs, imitating famous singers, and celebrating their new life. One night, Fatima said, "Mom, how I'd love to spend the night here and not go back home. But my daughter, the house needs cleaning." "We'll clean it then. It only needs the dust wiped off the windows and floors. Everything else is new and clean, as you see." "But, Fatima, there's no water or electricity in this house." "Is there water or electricity in the other house?" Zahir replied, "Do you wish to stay here tonight, Your Majesty?" "Yes, very much so." "Then let everyone get to work." "In truth, Mother, we all want to spend the night here as soon as possible." Cries of joy and cheers of happiness echoed throughout the house. Zahir and Fathi ran to fetch the cleaning supplies from the other house, while the girls brought water from the well to the new home. The work began, and it felt as if happiness had wings that made those who were touched by it feel no strain or fatigue from their labor. Some essential belongings were moved into the house under the cover of darkness, and it was decided that everyone would sleep in the same room that night to celebrate being together in this cherished home. In the morning, they would each take care of arranging their own rooms and moving the furniture, and so it was. Time seemed unable to wait, as if it wanted to hasten the realization of the family's final dream: the release of Abu Zahir from prison and their reunion. 3 years had passed since the house was completed, and they had passed over Zahir's family like a gentle cloud in a summer sky, leaving behind no trace except for the daughters becoming more beautiful and mature, Zahir advancing in his studies until he reached his final year at the teacher's college, and Fathi graduating and getting a job as a teacher at the Amari boys' school near their home. Fatima was in her final year of school and had received much help from Zahir and Fathi in her studies, allowing her to maintain her academic excellence while also keeping her royal demeanor and regal walk, which seemed impossible for her to shake off. Ali had started his first year of primary school, and it seemed as though time had arranged for Fathi to be at the school to take care of him, relieving their mother of any worry or fear for him. As for Haneen, she was now in her 3rd year of school and still clung to her sister Fatima, insisting on her right to be taken out for walks and trips, while continuing her studies. The winter months approached, and this time they brought with them the anticipated release of Abu Zahir from prison. Uncles began arriving from Jordan to participate in the welcome celebration. Old friends reappeared, and the doorbell at the house rarely stopped ringing. But all eyes seemed to be focused on Fathi, as if silently questioning what right this young man had to be present among the family. Fatima was her mother's main source of joy and happiness, constantly singing of her family's triumph over the difficult circumstances they had endured, and boasting about the accomplishments her father would find when he was released from prison. She filled the hearts of the entire family with hope and comfort, giving them the strength to ensure that no one could shatter the beautiful image they had built for themselves. Fatima never failed to praise Fathi, and no one in the family opposed the clear friendship between Fatima and Fathi. Fatima's laughter, which filled the house, and her light, playful movements as she helped anyone in need made everyone love and respect her. However, her uncles and other relatives did not see her behavior in the same light. One uncle would scold her, another would advise her, and eventually they reached the point of forbidding her from befriending Fathi, talking to him, or even being present when he was around. Fatima was saddened by her uncle's words at first, but when she saw her mother's health deteriorating due to the situation, she decided to confront her uncles and relatives. She said to her mother, "Don't be sad, mother. No one in this world can take away my laughter or steal my happiness after all the high price we've paid. I will remain as you love me to be, your daughter Fatima, the princess, right?" Zahir laughed sadly, knowing the pressure her daughter was under due to her uncle's scolding and reprimands. But she seized the opportunity and said, "Do you promise me that, Fatima? Will you keep your promise?" Fatima paused for a moment, as the word promise brought back an entire world of painful memories to her mind in just a few seconds. Then she looked at her mother's tired face and realized that this was the only face that had kept its promises to her. The same face that was now asking for a promise. She cautiously asked, "What do you want me to promise, my queen?" Zahir laughed and said, "I hope that these smiles will remain on our faces no matter what we go through." "And is there something we will go through?" "What's going on, mother? Is there something you haven't told me?" "No, I just meant, well, your sisters have grown up and so have you. Your uncles have come forward with marriage proposals for their sons." "Oh my God! And me too. As for you, the talk was more in hints because you're still a student in school. But yes, Najla and Zainab." "Why, mother? Why would Najla and Zainab leave us and go to Jordan, especially when we are so close to reuniting with father?" "Listen, Fatima, Najla and Zainab are happy about this news, and I don't want you to spoil their joy." Fatima remained silent as if trying to absorb everything she had heard. Zahir continued, "In any case, the decision is up to your father. We'll see what happens. But the important thing is, will you promise me that you'll keep your smiles and happiness no matter what?" Fatima leaned over to kiss her mother's head and said with a heavy heart, "I promise to keep trying." And that was good enough. Fatima couldn't fully understand what was happening. She wanted to find someone to blame, to direct her anger towards. But how? Where could she find time to blame it? Where could she find life to reproach it? Where could she find fate to argue with it? Such as life, stingy, stingy. It doesn't like to give without taking in return. And such as time, its only unending game is surprising people with unexpected events. The presence of Salim and Kamal, the proposed grooms for Zainab and Najla, in Zahir's home greatly helped create an atmosphere of kindness and affection. The two sisters became occupied with whispering and giggling among themselves, staying close to each other as they consulted and planned what seemed like studies and exams of the emotions of their cousin grooms. But Fatima observed everything, happy for her sister's joy, yet worried about the loneliness she would face after they left. A thought that her sisters seemed to have forgotten Fatima's inability to talk to Fathi only fueled a whirlwind of emotions inside her that she never thought she would feel. She began to miss him, longed for his jokes, his advice, and wanted so badly to share what was happening with him. But she couldn't. She wanted to help him this time, but couldn't find a way to do so. With each passing day, those feelings grew stronger, to the point where Fatima began to yearn to see him. She would listen intently to Zahir, hoping for just one sentence that would reassure her about him. If she heard something she liked, the house would be filled with her laughter, joy, and energy. If not, she would excuse herself to study or sleep, comforting herself with the thought that her father would be released from prison soon and everything would turn out for the best. The cold began to creep into the atmosphere, erasing the warm, joyful nights and spreading its grip over the winter days that the family of Zahir endured, awaiting the release of Abu Zahir from prison. Fatima, a 17-year-old, walked home from school with her braided black hair flowing down her back, her slender figure, and a graceful walk filled with confidence and seriousness. Her wide eyes, framed by long black lashes, made it easy to believe that kohl adorned her eyelids, only to realize that it was the natural darkness of her lashes. One couldn't help but marvel at the beauty she embodied. When she spoke, you were left wondering whether to admire her beauty, her intellect, or her self-assurance. These were the very reasons that made Fathi swear to himself that she could only be his. She was the princess of his days and the queen of his dreams. Her presence never left his thoughts, and he couldn't stop thinking about her. As for Fatima, who was walking home, she didn't want to admit that all this burning yearning inside her chest was nothing but the love she had been living with for years with Fathi, without ever paying it much attention. The rain seemed to struggle to fall to the ground. Whenever the cold intensified and the clouds tightened their grip on the sky, they would part again. Fatima almost reached the door of her home, watching this battle between the clouds, but before she could open the door, the rain surprised her with its first drops, landing on her face, and then intensified, soaking her hair and clothes. Little did Fatima know that Fatih and Zahir were waiting for her inside the porch, expecting her to hurry inside. But instead, she threw her bag aside, moved away from the door, and spread her arms, welcoming more of the rain. She began to twirl around, looking up at the sky as if determined to see the farthest point from where these orderly droplets were falling. All aimed directly at her. Fatima started laughing and twirling under the rain, seemingly unwilling to stop, until the lightning began to strike the skies, and the thunder roared as if threatening her with more rain if she didn't go inside. She crossed her arms over her chest, still laughing joyfully, and headed for the door. Zahir turned to Fatih and said, "This crazy girl. I don't know why she does this every year, as if she's welcoming the rain with open arms. Or maybe she thinks the rain falls just for her." Fatih laughed as he watched her, knowing this about her, and it pleased him greatly to think that at this moment, she might be thinking of him, or perhaps she was considering him while standing under this rain. And maybe, just maybe, she would never be able to forget him as long as there were rains every year. Fatima stepped into the porch, water dripping from her hair and face, and slowly raised her eyes to see who had witnessed her little escapade. When she found Zahir and Fatih smiling, she said, "Thank God! I thought you were my uncles." Then, in a quieter voice, she asked, "Where are they?" "They're visiting Jerusalem. Your uncle invited them for lunch and to pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque." "Oh, how I love that uncle of mine. How I love him," she said, clutching her bag tightly to her chest as she headed to her room, leaving Zahir and Fatih's laughter filling the space just like it used to. Fatima quickly changed her clothes, eager to sit with her two friends and talk to them. She grabbed her towel and walked toward them, drying her hair, saying, "Did you hear about Najla and Zainab's engagement?" "Yes, I did. And I also heard there's talk of your engagement too." Fatima's heart leaped to her throat as she looked at him with reproachful eyes and said, "Do you think I'll agree? Is there any guarantee that you won't?" Zahir looked at the two of them, who seemed to have forgotten his presence, and remained silent as he listened to Fatima say, "Of course, I won't agree. Even if your father agrees. My father won't agree against my wishes. Can you be sure of that too? Time may have changed your father, and I don't want you to pin your hopes on the father of the past." Fatima turned her face toward the window, watching the rain to hide the annoyance and pain in her eyes from Fatih, and said, "What do you think?" Fatih fell silent, unable to answer, then shifted uneasily in his seat and said, "You know my opinion no longer matters here. Your uncles will influence your father. I asked you what you think." "Fatima, I want." Then, looking at Zahir, he said, "I'm counting on you, Zahir. Don't let anyone force Fatima into doing something against her will." Fatima turned toward Fatih, her voice filled with anger. "I asked you what you think," Fatih shouted. "I think you should refuse. You know I want you to refuse." At this, Zahir, with calm nerves, said, "All right, let's settle this. Do you want Fatima? Fatih?" Fatih began shouting again, "Yes, yes, I want her." Zahir seized the opportunity to put on a short, comedic performance. He got up, embraced Fatih, and said, "Oh, my friend, you've kept all that in your heart all this time. Come here." Zahir pretended to cry dramatically, then pulled out his handkerchief to dry his tears. Squeezing it on one side, Fatima burst out laughing at her brother's antics and ran inside, while Fatih gave Zahir a playful punch on the shoulder to end the mockery. Fatih's words were enough to keep Fatima happy and laughing despite everything that was happening, until the day arrived for Abu Zahir's release from prison. The house was filled with guests. The time had come. The women sat by the windows eagerly watching for the procession, while the men had all climbed into the cars arranged to pick up Abu Zahir in front of the prison gates. Meanwhile, Zahir and her daughters were in the kitchen, preparing delicious dishes to serve to everyone. A feast to mark the occasion of a lifetime. The sound of car horns began to reach the ears of those waiting, growing louder and closer. People started pointing toward the road and calling out, "Look, Abu Zahir's procession has appeared. The cars approached, and ululations filled the air, echoing from the throats of the women. Zahir and her daughters dropped everything in their hands and rushed to greet the beloved family member they had longed to see. All eyes were fixed on Zahir as he jumped out of the car and hurried to open the door for his father. Tears began to flow as everyone saw Abu Zahir holding his son's hand, not wanting to let go as he greeted and embraced his brothers, as though the fear of losing him still lingered, even while he was surrounded by his loved ones and family. Abu Zahir could no longer distinguish between the people around him, relatives, neighbors, brothers, and sons, but one thing he was sure of was that he was still holding Zahir's hand tightly. Zahir stepped forward, welcoming her husband with joyful ululations and words of greeting. The daughters approached, kissing his hand and cheek, delighted by his return. All except for Fatima, who stood silently by the door of the inner balcony, watching everything unfold as if expecting him to ask and call out, "Where is Fatima?" But he didn't. He didn't even lift Ali towards him after kissing him and letting him go. He didn't notice that he was entering a new house, different from the one he had left behind. Everything Fatima had imagined did not happen. He entered the house, sat among friends and relatives, greeting one and bidding farewell to another, without noticing anything. The food was served, the feast was laid out, and everyone rejoiced. The day passed, and no one noticed the constant stream of visitors to Abu Zahir's house. The nights at Abu Zahir's house grew longer, with the sun seeming to hold its breath, exhausted from waiting for them to sleep before it could reveal itself again. Often, the sun would rise from its bed before Abu Zahir and his relatives had gone to theirs. Those long nights provided the perfect opportunity for Abu Zahir's brothers to have him to themselves, filling his head with their opinions, starting with the engagement of the two daughters and ending with objections to Fathi's presence in the family. No one spoke to him about his right to return to the home, not as an intruder on their lives but as a compliment to them. Fatima often stood in shock, her mouth agape at her father's behavior. She couldn't understand all the criticism directed at her mother. She couldn't understand the words, "This is allowed," and "This is forbidden." She had no idea that the father who had been absent for 6 long years had gone and would never return. This was a new father she would have to get to know all over again. But she consoled herself by seeing the strong friendship that had developed between him and Zahir, telling herself, "I'm sure Zahir will fix things." That was until she saw Zahir one day shouting at his father and uncles and walking away, saying, "Where were all of you when Fathi was my whole family?" Zahir stormed towards his mother, speaking loudly, "Mother, look at them. They're pressuring father to agree to my sister's marriages and filling his head with talk of customs, traditions, and rules about Fathi. Tell them, mother. Tell them who Fathi is. Tell them about the hundreds of troubles he saved us from and the thousands of noble acts he did for us." Before Zahir could utter a word, Abu Zahir was standing behind her, saying, "Don't you dare, Zahir. Don't you ever raise your voice at me or your uncles again. In fact, never raise your voice in this house. Do you understand?" Zahir looked at his father sorrowfully and said, "This house, father? Fine then, I'll leave it to you." Zahir left the house in anger. Zahir couldn't say anything as the situation grew more complicated, and her health continued to decline. Abu Zahir turned to Fatima and shouted, "Let him leave. I won't ask about him." Fatima looked at her father with a mix of sorrow and astonishment, her tears silently streaming down her cheeks. Abu Zahir then asked, "And you? What do you want?" "I want nothing but my father. I want the father who left us 6 years ago and promised he'd return. But he never did. Please, if you find him, send him back to us. He was kind. He was a king and a hero who built a fence around his home, and we fought to rebuild it so he wouldn't be sad, so he would know we were responsible. I'm sure that if he were here now, he wouldn't let you uproot a single tree from that fence, and he wouldn't have let Zahir leave at all." Abu Zahir quietly left the house, only to find Salim and Kamal following Zahir, bringing him back. Abu Zahir thanked God in his heart and returned to sit in the balcony, silently reflecting on what Fatima had said and regretting all that had happened. Sadness slowly began to settle in Fatima's heart as she saw that her brother Zahir had become someone whose opinion no longer mattered, someone who had no say in anything that happened, especially after he failed to keep his friend Fathi by his side as he had always done. Fatima's beautiful eyes grew accustomed to tears as she watched her two sisters pack their bags for their wedding day. She saw her mother's heart could no longer bear any of it. The wedding date was set, and the final night for the sisters in their father's home arrived, with heavy rain and storms. The women gathered around Zahir, preparing the wedding clothes, while the men sat with Abu Zahir, chatting. Fatima locked herself and her sisters in their room, planning what needed to be done for the wedding tomorrow. After a moment of silence, Fatima said, "I have a wish, but I don't think it will ever come true." "What is it?" they asked. "I wish the rain would stop, the sky would clear, and the moon would appear, so we could light the kerosene lamp and go sit by the well, just like we used to. And it would be a blessing if Zahir appeared with Fathi." Najla said, "I have a wish too, though I doubt it will come true. I wish we could spend this night in each other's arms, all sleeping together in one room, on one bed, close to each other, like we did on our first night in this house." Zainab added, "And I have a wish, though I don't think it will come true. Do you remember when our mother used to struggle to buy us new clothes? In those days, we would wear each other's clothes and go out proudly, as if each of us had bought a new outfit. And our mother would laugh a laugh I still wish I could hear." Zahir suddenly opened the door, cutting off their conversation, and said, "What are you all doing? Come on. The weather outside is almost like summer." The girls shouted with joy, "Fatima's wish has come true." Zainab said, "Here, Fatima, take my coat, and I'll wear Najla's, and Najla can wear yours. We'll show mother our new coats." When Zahir saw what the girls had done, her smile grew wider, but her tears got the best of her as she cried, "I swear these are tears of joy. I'm happy for all of you." Zahir lit the lamp and called out to his sisters, "Come over here, to the well courtyard. Someone wants to say goodbye to you." Najla shouted, "Fathi, isn't it?" The girls hurried toward the well courtyard. Fatima approached Zahir and asked, "Does father know about this?" "Father? Has he even left prison?" Fatima laughed, understanding Zahir's meaning as he began searching for Fathi with the lamp, calling out for him. Fathi appeared, laughing, and said, "Like a thief, I snuck in like a thief, hiding. But I couldn't miss the chance to say goodbye." Fathi shook hands with the girls, his heart longing to hold Fatima's hand for as long as possible. But the awkwardness he felt within himself made him let go of her hand and ask, "How are you, Fatima?" "Not much better," she replied. Fathi ignored her response and looked at the girls, saying, "You must be in better spirits." "Yes, after seeing you. You're like a dear brother to us, as you know." Suddenly, a choked voice from behind them asked, "And where is dear?" Fathi threw himself into Zahir's arms, kissing her hands and saying, "You are the best mother any young man could wish for. I was truly fortunate to spend time with you all." Everyone gathered around Zahir, kissing her warmly. No one noticed that Abu Zahir had been standing behind them, listening until he said, "So, Fathi is here." The group parted from Fathi, all of them ready to face the father in case he decided to send Fathi away. But to their surprise, Abu Zahir said, "I've been looking for you. Zahir needs a brother by his side tomorrow at the girl's wedding. What do you say?" "I say congratulations, uncle. I'll be here whenever you need me." For a moment, Fatima thought she had regained the father she had been waiting for all those long years. When Zahir turned the lantern towards his father, Fatima didn't know how or when Fathi managed to grab her hand and squeeze it as if making a promise. Then, he let go and excused himself, saying, "Allow me to leave now. I'll see you all tomorrow, God willing." The girls entered the house, jumping with joy, holding each other's hands and whispering happily. Then Najla stopped them, saying, "My wish remains. I want it to come true." Fatima said, "Its fulfillment depends on our mother." She started calling out, "Mother, mother, can we spend the night in one bed, with you, my sisters, and Zahir, just like the first night we spent in this house?" Zahir laughed. "This house is so full of guests that I don't know where I'll be sleeping tonight. If you can find me a place among you, I'd be happy." The girls cheered, clapped, and laughed. Fatima said, "Let's go prepare the bed." When Najla was sure no one else was in the room and that no one could overhear them, she whispered to her sisters, "I have important news, especially for you, Fatima." Fatima grabbed Najla and pulled her down onto the bed forcefully. "What is it? I feel like something is happening, and I'm unaware. Tell me." "It's true. Salim told me that our uncle insisted on asking for your hand in marriage from our father. He convinced him that you could marry during the summer vacation after your exams. When he sensed that our father was hesitant, he assured him that Zahir wanted to marry into Fathi's family and that your cousin had more right to you than Fathi, the outsider." "What are you saying, Najla?" "Listen, Fatima. Father has agreed to it. I think the way he treated Fathi tonight was because he's confident he'll marry you to his nephew. Fathi no longer concerns him or the uncles now that he's agreed. In any case, Father will likely ask you tonight for your consent. Be ready and prepare a convincing answer because Father has made up his mind." Fatima swallowed hard, trying to process what she had just heard. She looked at her sisters, seeking help, but quickly jumped to her feet when she heard her father calling her name. She straightened her posture, adjusted her coat, and went to answer him. As Najla had predicted, he asked her about marrying her cousin and joining her sisters in Jordan. Fatima replied calmly, "Father, it seems you've gotten used to living without us, but as you can see, Mother can no longer live without one of us by her side. So, I will stay by her side for as long as I live. I will not marry my cousin or anyone else who would take me to Jordan. Do you understand what I mean? I want to stay here on this land. That's all. I want to stay by my mother's side." Abu Zahir listened to Fatima, wanting to believe her. He found no reason to doubt her, so he nodded and left her in silence. When he reached the door, he said, "You know that your mother will be traveling with your sisters to Jordan to ensure they settle in? Father, Mother can't handle the journey. Please, don't let her travel." Abu Zahir remained silent and left the room, returning to his brothers, who were sitting on the porch. The last night for the brides at their father's house passed just as Najla had wished. Their mother embraced them, sleeping beside them while praying for their success and happiness. Morning came, and it seemed as though the sun had envied the brides. It dressed up for the day, shining brightly and warmly, as if celebrating the wedding before the guests arrived. The girls rushed to the salon, where their makeup and hair were styled, and they put on their wedding dresses. Meanwhile, the men, especially Zahir and Fathi, arranged chairs around the courtyard and prepared the drinks and sweets for the celebration. The hours of the day passed quickly, and soon it was time for the brides to return from the salon. The two grooms, Zahir and Fathi, each drove a car to bring the brides to the wedding venue at Abu Zahir's house. The two cars stopped in front of the salon. The four young men got out and stood, waiting for their brides to surprise them with their beauty in their white dresses. The salon door opened, and Najla stepped out, gathering the long train of her wedding gown. When she saw her fiancé standing still, stunned by the sight, she called out to him, "Are you going to help me, or what?" He quickly rushed over to help gather the stunningly adorned gown, and Najla gathered her white veil and stepped into the flower-decorated car. Zainab followed behind Najla, fully adorned and beautiful. When she saw her fiancé standing frozen in place, she leaned towards Fatima and said, "He's just like his brother. I have to tell him what to do." Then, smiling, she motioned for him to come forward. He immediately understood her gesture and hurried to gather the train of her gown, helping her into the second car. Fatima stood at the salon door, laughing at Zainab's antics. Her black hair was let down, cascading over her back and swaying on her slender waist. Her elegant dress only enhanced her beauty. Fathi did not hide his admiration this time and didn't hesitate to approach her and whisper near her ear, "My lady, you are the most beautiful princess on the face of the earth." Fatima laughed, her cheeks blushing, as she glanced around the crowd to see if anyone had noticed what had just happened. But Fathi bowed slightly before her and continued, "Does my lady mind if I escort her to the car?" Fatima hurried towards the car, saying, "But I can reach the car without help. Thank you." Then she looked towards Zahir and said, "Please remind me to promote this loyal soldier very soon." "As you wish, my lady. Shall we proceed now, Fathi?" The cars set off with the brides back to the house. Fatima smiled with joy for her sisters at times and with happiness for the sweet words of affection she had heard from Fathi at other times. Yet a trace of sadness crossed her face now and then as she remembered that after this joy would come separation. Indeed, the celebration ended with the end of the day. Each groom took his bride and left for the hotel to start their honeymoon, away from all the loved ones who had gathered to bless and celebrate them. The hard work was left to Fatima. After all the chaos caused by the wedding, the house needed to be cleaned and organized again. Meanwhile, Zahir busied herself packing her suitcase, complying with Abu Zahir's insistence on accompanying their daughters. Everyone was used to Fatima waking up early for the dawn prayer and sitting to watch the sun's disk rise over the world from behind the tall mountain, like a thief sneaking in slowly, trying not to be noticed. Once it had taken over the sky, it would sweep from east to west, declaring its victory over the darkness of night, which never tired of chasing it. Many who knew her had come to love this habit and wanted to emulate it. Over time, the whole family, even their guests, would wake up at dawn to chase away the devil. As they would say, wash for prayer and pray. But this time, there was no time after the prayer to enjoy a cup of coffee with milk as Fatima usually prepared for them. Everyone was busy packing their bags, and Zahir wandered around the house, not knowing what she wanted or what to do. Her heart was heavily preoccupied with Fatima and the little ones she was leaving behind, while her mind assured her that it was only right to be with her daughters in their first days in their new married life. Zahir kept repeating her advice to Fatima, adding more instructions. Between one piece of advice and the next, she would return to remind her to take care of Hanin and Ali, even though Ali was nearly finished with first grade and Hanin was almost done with third grade. Yet Zahir still saw that taking care of them was a responsibility too great for Fatima. This was why she repeatedly said, "Take care of your siblings more than anything else. Promise me that." Even when the cars began to depart for the Jordan Bridge, she leaned out of the window to say to Fatima, "Promise me." During the journey, Zahir continuously recited prayers and Quranic verses, hoping that God would allow her to reach Jordan without her health deteriorating further. She had come to realize that the previous days had worn down her health under the sharp teeth of illness, and she was now certain that she desperately needed the rest she could not ask for in these circumstances. As for Fatima, who wept over the separation from her sisters, she found solace only in embracing her brother Zahir, burying her face in his chest, and crying, "I thought that father's return home would reunite us. Look, it's only been a few days, and here we are, separating again. Fatima, calm down and be happy for your sisters. Father didn't force any of them to marry. Parting is hard. Can you promise me that you won't do like them and leave me?" "Yes, yes, I promise I will never go to Jordan. Even if my cousin proposes to me, I will refuse, just like you." Fatima laughed at Zahir's words, and Zahir, pleased with her laughter, said, "All right then. Let's divide up the tasks at home. I can help you with everything while mother is away, except for one thing." "What is it?" "Hanging the laundry on the lines. The neighbors will talk about me if they see me doing that." Zahir's jokes opened a new door for Fatima, allowing her to step through it towards her upcoming days with composure instead of dwelling on tears and sorrow. Zahir was supposed to be away from home for only a few days, but her absence extended to a full week, and the family's worry began to grow. Despite this, Zahir remained distant in conversation with his father to avoid any confrontation, and Fatima was the same until she saw him packing his belongings one morning and saying, "I'm going to Jordan. Your mother wouldn't stay away this long unless something was forcing her to. How will we know about you and her? I'll bring her back tomorrow if possible." Abu Zahir picked up his suitcase and set off to make arrangements to cross the border. Fatima remained at home with the little ones, locking the house in the morning before heading to her school, then returning at noon to wait for their return and Zahir's, who had explained his special circumstances to the supervisors at the institute, allowing him to stay at home during the whole time. Fatima's concern for her mother grew as she counted the days of her father's absence without hearing any news from him. Zahir appeared distracted, expecting to hear the worst news but not knowing how to deal with it if it came. He only snapped out of his thoughts when the doorbell rang loudly. Zahir looked through the glass and saw Fathi standing at the door. He opened it and welcomed him, noticing the worry and exhaustion on his face. So he asked, "What's wrong, Fathi? You're not yourself. What's happened?" "The truth is, Zahir, it seems I also need to go to Jordan." "Why?" "My mother's health suddenly worsened. I've informed my brothers in Jordan, and they insisted we bring her there so they can take care of her. As you know, they have homes and wives there. The situation is better for my mother with them. So, you'll drop her off and come back? If only it were that simple. But she's my mother. I'll stay by her side until I'm sure she's all right. You know she can't bear to be without me, which is why she stayed here all these years, taking care of me instead of moving in with my brothers." "What do you mean? Is this goodbye then?" "I think so, and I don't know how long it will be." The two friends fell silent for a moment before Fathi spoke again. "I wanted to ask for something. I want to ask for Fatima's hand in marriage before I leave." "What do you say? Are you crazy? You're leaving for Jordan, and you want to propose to Fatima? Have you forgotten that she refused my cousin just to avoid traveling? But I'm not her cousin, and I want her to be mine. Then you'll have to propose after you return from Jordan. I'm afraid my absence will last for years. So, you know your absence will be long." That sentence marked the end of the conversation. Zahir stood up and left Fathi alone on the balcony, lost and unsure of what to say or do. He headed toward Fatima, certain that she had heard everything that had transpired, as neither his voice nor Fathi's had been quiet at all. Fatima, looking sorrowfully at her brother, said, "Tell him Fatima doesn't want you, even if you stayed here." "What? How?" "His circumstances are worse than mine, and his priorities are harder than mine. His mother needs him in Jordan, and my siblings and mother need me here. I think that even if I promised to wait for him, he wouldn't be able to live there in peace. But if he knows that I refuse him, he can build his life there in peace. Maybe, as he said, his absence will last for years. That means his work, his family, and perhaps his marriage. Anything can happen over the years. Isn't that right, Zahir? Don't you love him, Fatima? A love that is forbidden for both of us, it seems. Why should I chase after a forbidden love and make him suffer as well? Please, tell him I refuse him. Let him continue with his life without looking back at me." Zahir went out to the balcony, shocked by what his sister had said. He looked at Fathi, and the look of astonishment on his face gave Fathi an idea of what Fatima had said. Zahir then spoke. "I told her. She refused." "Yes, I want to talk to her. She said she refuses you, even if you stay here. What's left to say?" Fatima's words struck Fathi's heart like a dagger. Sorrow clouded his face, and he looked at Zahir for a long time, as if searching for something to say but finding nothing. He headed toward the balcony door, opened it, and left in silence. Fatima didn't cry or wail about her fate. Instead, she brushed off her clothes and went to finish the household chores, challenging herself with the tasks. Zahir said to her, "He's gone. Why don't you cry like you usually do when there's a disaster?" "Because he hasn't really left, and you know he won't leave us easily, even if he travels to the ends of the earth." "Then agree, Fatima, and I'll convince father of your marriage to him. I'll stand by your side, no matter what. I told you it's a forbidden love. How can I follow him to Jordan and leave these two innocent faces behind? How can I leave your mother? I'm even afraid to think about what happened to her after father's long absence. And how can he love me when I'm tied down to a whole family that can't follow him? If he's tied to us, we'll only add to his burden. This equation will never work, no matter how hard we try. Then let him propose to you, and when your circumstances change, he can come back and marry you. Keep him tied to me for years? He knows that his brothers are trying to tie him down there, and they won't let him come back and live alone here. Then, there's no solution?" Fatima fell silent and turned toward the house, looking for something to occupy herself with. Zahir asked, "Aren't you going to cry? Does the butcher cry for his slaughtered animal? Today, I'm the butcher, and I've slaughtered him so that he can live his life far from me." Zahir was pained by his sister's words. He knew that, even though her decision might be right, she felt horrible about what she had done to Fathi. While the Friday morning sun tried to peek out, clouds from the winter season still hung heavy, making the day cold and dim. Fatima heard the doorbell ring and wondered who it could be. She went to open the door and found Fathi standing there, looking anxious. She opened the door, and he greeted her, saying, "I couldn't leave without saying goodbye to you. To all of you. So, you're traveling today?" "Yes, the car is outside, and my mother is waiting in it." Fatima almost reached out to him, begging him to stay, but the sorrow in his eyes reminded her of her decision. She stood firm as he continued, "I'd like you to keep this box for me until I return. Please take it before Zahir comes." Fathi handed her a small cardboard box. She took it inside, saying, "I'll call Zahir. Please, come in while I do." But Zahir had already risen to see what was going on and found Fathi at the door. Fathi said to him, "I wanted to say goodbye, my brother and friend. I'm leaving." He rushed toward Zahir and hugged him tightly. Zahir wrapped his arms around Fathi and said, "You know that no matter how long you're gone, you have a brother here who misses you every moment. Goodbye, my friend. Give my regards to your mother. She's in the car. You can say goodbye to her yourself." Zahir let go of Fathi and hurried to the car to bid farewell to his mother. Fatima walked slowly toward Fathi, her stomach turning with unease. She said to him, "Take care of yourself, and remember us kindly. And you, be the Fatima I know, the cheerful, always laughing, forever childlike Fatima. Don't let anything change that, my lady." Fatima shook Fathi's hand in farewell, though sorrow and pain gripped her. But this time, Fathi didn't hold her hand tightly or prolong the handshake. He hurried out of the house, using his mother's long wait as an excuse to tea that moment. Fatima knew that she had thrown away a heart that loved her into the abyss and had not protected it. Her only consolation in everything she had done was that she believed it was the only way to allow him to live a normal life away from her. The car carrying Fathi and his mother drove off, and Zahir returned to the house to find his sister sitting on her bed, pale, fighting back tears. He looked at her hesitantly, then decided to leave her alone without saying anything and went to his room. Fatima looked at the box, sometimes approaching it to open it, then stepping away from it again. At that moment, she didn't know why she suddenly started searching for a pen and paper, but she realized later that whenever the world became too much for her, she would turn to her pen to write down anything that would help her release what was in her heart. Fatima picked up her pen and began writing to Fathi, knowing he would never read her words asterisk. "You who made my eyelids your pillow, and on the bleeding of my heart, you sang your song. You grow angry when I say I don't love you, but deep down, your heart knows I do." Fatima tore the paper from her notebook, unsure of where to keep it. She felt that Fathi's box would be the best place to store her writings. But she needed to open the box to look inside. Before opening the box, Fatima heard the sound of a car approaching the house. She rushed to the door to see who was coming this time, and her shock was immense when she saw her father stepping out of the car and closing the door behind him as it drove away, without her mother getting out of the car. Fatima opened the door, asking fearfully, "Where's my mother? Where's my mother? You said you would bring her." Abu Zahir didn't respond to his daughter. He simply walked inside, heading to his room and sitting silently by his bed. Fatima knocked on Zahir's door, urging him anxiously to get up and find out what had happened to their mother. Both siblings approached their father to ask about her. Fatima began to tremble, cry, and feel nauseous again. Abu Zahir remained silent, and Zahir, furious, shouted, "What happened? Did she die? Tell us, man." Abu Zahir looked at his children with sadness and sternness, saying, "When we arrived in Jordan, I found them burying her. I didn't see her or what happened to her." Fatima fainted from the shock of what she had heard. Zahir began shouting at the top of his lungs, "You killed her, and now you want to kill Fatima too. You've insisted on wearing her out since you came out of your prison. You're not the father I know. You're not my father. You're not my father." Abu Zahir maintained his silence, approaching his daughter in an attempt to help her, his heart aching from what he had heard. But Zahir, feeling none of that empathy, continued to say, "Stay away, man. Don't come near us." Zahir picked up his sister Fatima and rushed her to her bed, weeping over her head like a child. From time to time, he would cry out, "Poor you, mother of Zahir. Poor you, my mother." Abu Zahir carried his burdens in his chest, pressing his hand over his heart as if trying to contain his painful words. Then he left the house, wandering aimlessly, as if he wanted to give his children some time to process what had happened, hoping they would regain their senses. The morning days passed sadly for the grieving family. Fatima suffered from pain, which necessitated calling a doctor who could only offer her some sedatives to help her sleep. Fatima's faith in God was her only solace through her suffering. She devoted her early days to reading the Quran, praying, and asking for her mother's mercy. She then focused on the two small children, who were her mother's last wish for her. She began to force herself to care for them as much as possible. As days went by, Fatima found herself unable to return to school. Despite Zahir's insistence on helping her and his assurances that he would explain the lessons she missed, she didn't go back to her studies. She continued with household chores, leaving Zahir responsible for the children's education. Abu Zahir felt the large gap between him and his children and found nothing he could do to bridge it. He decided to travel to his daughters and brothers in Jordan for a while. Zahir graduated from the teacher's house and took a job at the school where Fathi used to work. He started supporting his siblings and fulfilling their needs. As for Fatima, family reunification no longer meant anything to her. Holidays and joy had lost their significance except for the smile on the children's faces. She found no friend better than her pen and notebook, which she began writing in whenever she had the chance. Abu Zahir continued to move between his home and Jordan, and Zahir continued to avoid conflict with his father. Fatima no longer cared about what was happening. She was consumed by the thought that she had sacrificed her life for nothing. One day, she said to Zahir, "My mother believed that one day all the Palestinian people would unite against the occupation. But look, it's been a year since her death, and people live happily. The cinemas operate day and night, the parks are filled with people throughout the summer months, and even the stores keep selling the latest fashion trends. Nothing has changed except here. It started with father, then the house, then mother, and then the sisters who haven't thought of visiting us yet. And my high school diploma, if you look away, you'll see the occupation gaining more and more, increasing its profit in this world. Can anyone explain all this to me? And who cares about explaining it? What's important is that you find a way out of this sadness. Fatima, you need to return to yourself and live. Let your mother be an example for you." She remained determined despite everything she went through and managed to care for all of us without letting sorrow overwhelm her and without letting despair reach her heart. Yes, but she died in the end. And you know she died exhausted from worries. Maybe that's true, but if she had been able to return to us, she wouldn't have allowed you to do what you're doing, would she? Do you think, Zahir, that the homeland is worth all this sacrifice? The homeland, I believe father made a mistake with what he did. But what can be done now? What's done is done. Personally, Fatima, I don't want a homeland. I also think that Palestine, especially Palestine, is a forbidden and destructive love. Throughout history, anyone who loves it and wants it is killed and destroyed. I believe our turn has come. A forbidden and destructive love. But everyone is happy except you. Are you the only one who loves it? Or maybe only your mother loved it? Fatima, as Fathi once said, you will become a poet in the future. You keep saying strange things. Zahir started repeating some words, laughing. Forbidden love, deadly and destructive love. Whoever loves it dies. Fatima, starting to laugh, replied, "Then listen to this. Palestine is like a beautiful gypsy. The scent of her incense is sweeter than musk, drawing you to bow before her beauty from great distances. But she is a cursed gypsy. She has been covered with 1,000 magical spells so that she belongs to no one. Her home is in the hearts, and there's no gain for hands to grasp. You will die of regret, you who fell into her trap. No matter how much you gather your love and use your cunning, the limits of passion are her boundaries, and we cannot cross those boundaries." Zahir laughed at Fatima's words, seeing her say them with enthusiasm as if delivering a war speech. His laughter grew when he saw her stand proudly, looking at him defiantly as if to say, "What do you think of that?" He gestured for her to stop and then said, "Your words are still strange, Fatima. And why is that? Despite all the lament for the people and their approaching death, it carries a message of victory. Does it carry all that? Where? Didn't you say that everyone who loves it will die? Then the Jews will die. They are the ones who have come to offer her the precious and the cheap, aren't they?" Fatima thought about what Zahir said for a moment and then replied, "I think you're right. We will all die." She let out a laugh that filled the house, a laugh that the walls had long missed. It was a laugh that placed Fatima's feet on the threshold of life, which she had closed off for a long time. Zahir's joy at seeing Fatima's return to life was immense. He vowed to himself never to lose her again and to allow nothing to sadden her, no matter the sacrifices he had to make. The days passed with a cheerful face for the family. Fatima's face no longer showed frowns. If Zahir saw a shadow of sadness on his sister's face, he knew she was thinking of Fathi, a sorrow he could not do anything about. He too missed Fathi and wished for his return. Fatima often talked to herself, pondering, what if he returned? What if I looked up one day and found him before me? What if I picked up the phone and heard his warm voice? Then she would return to the reality of her thoughts. This will not happen. He has distanced himself and forgotten. He hasn't even thought of visiting like my two sisters. Fatima took her pen and wrote, "As if you were etched on the sunrise of my day, as if you were a heartbeat from my heart, flowing in my veins, as if you were from my entire memory and its backdrop, revealing itself every time an image appears in my imagination. Leave, depart from my life, leave, get down from the throne of my heart, dismount. If your standing is revenge for a postponed promise, or perhaps love, then by your love, leave, forbidden to me. Like the love of the land, your love, they have forbidden it, carved your name on my heart. You are like Al-Aqsa, like the cradle, like Mount Ebal, the one who loves you dies, and your adversary dies.